I want to bring you in here. So Walker Corp obviously has a lot of developments across many of the regions that we're talking about, and like we saw in the previous panel, you must see a bit of competitive tension working across all of those regions.
Certainly do. As a resident of Broadwater and on the Gold Coast, and in a major partnership with Sunshine Coast Council with Maroochydore City Centre, I see the different friction, but I also see a collective approach around Brisbane 2032. I think from a pure branding and marketing point of view, we're going to see Brisbane splashed up on the screens for a lot. But you're also going to see some great footage of the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast and the region. So there is some competitive tension, and I think that's because we're talking about businesses. Our local governments are the biggest in the country. Brisbane City Council has a budget of over $4 billion, Gold Coast over $2.6 billion. So I think there's that friction all the time because they are businesses, but I am seeing them working together, and they need to, because Brisbane is going to be splashed on all the screens around the world, and that's our real opportunity to maximise on it. Yeah, I mean, competition is good. It drives, the regions can drive each other to be better. Are there any examples you can give of anybody that you work with or that you come across that have been, maybe on the Sunshine Coast that's like, oh, no, don't confuse us with the Gold Coast? I'm not going to look at the Mayor to answer that question. No, there is. I think people are very proud of the local governments they're in. It's like supporting a rugby league team. Unfortunately, I go for the West Tigers, and I don't talk about that often. Oh no. But I guess. I guess what I'm saying is it's good to be passionate about the region you're in. It's good to be passionate about a rugby league team, but you still support the sport. So the Sunshine Coast don't want to be the Gold Coast, and vice versa. But I don't think they need to be. And I think to James's point around precincts, I think that's really critical. That you look at some of the more successful precincts over the last few years, they are putting us on the map. Howard Smith Wharves, look at the job they've done, the work ARIA are doing in South Brisbane. You look at the work we're doing in Maroochydore City Centre. That is a precinct that will create a point of difference. And we want people to come to Queensland, not for 1 week for the Olympics or 2 weeks. We want them to stay a month, and we want them to experience all the successful precincts across our region. So picking up on that point then, Gert-Jan, how should we, you mentioned you've been promoting Brisbane to the world for close to 2 decades. How do you think we should be promoting it specifically in the lead up to 2032? Like, is there any reason why when we're doing that we can't have the Gold Coast beaches, the Sunshine Coast hinterland, Australia Zoo, and saying that that's Brisbane?
And I think we should, and to be really honest, that's exactly what we as Brisbane Airport have been doing for the last decades. We're not only trying to attract people to visit Brisbane. There are people that want to be here, there are people that want to visit the city, but there are plenty of other people that want to go to the beaches of the Sun and Gold Coast. There are plenty of people that want to go to Toowoomba to do business. So we've always been positioning ourselves as the airport for South East Queensland. Likewise, for people departing from Brisbane Airport, we usually define it as our catchment area. It's about 3 hours drive from the airport. All these people naturally drive to Brisbane for their international travel. So that's what we do, and that's how we position ourselves. I think the beauty of this discussion is that it's actually the diversity of what we have to offer. We've got a vibrant city, we've got beautiful beaches, we've got quiet places like the Scenic Rim, so I think that's actually what makes us attractive. What's in the name? Yes, we need to use Brisbane 2032 as the vehicle to promote ourselves, but make. Are you
going to go there with a name?
Well, no. I think Brisbane 2032 is a perfect vehicle for it, but ultimately it's what we said before. LA's got Hollywood as well, so we've got the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast. That's not the issue. Furthermore, to be really honest, we're not only promoting this part of Queensland. We fly to 32 destinations in Queensland at the moment, so we connect actually Brisbane with all those destinations, and they're part of what we're doing as well. And I think that's the beauty of this city. It is naturally the capital of Queensland, and connecting all those places together.
Eleanor, we're clearly doing something right in SEQ because I was astounded by this figure, but 2,000 people moving here across all those LGAs every week. What is it, you obviously working at REA, what is it about this region, that has people from interstate and overseas moving here in those kind of numbers, and how has it changed, over the years?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and if we look back over the past kind of 6.5 years, and we can see that really the southeast Queensland region, including Toowoomba, has really been one of the strongest, or probably the strongest migration stories in the country throughout that period. If we cast our minds back to the pandemic period, we know net migration into the region was around 2 times the prior decade average, and we've seen continued strong inflows since then when it comes to net interstate migration, but also overseas migration as well, which has now really taken up the mantle, particularly in Brisbane and the Gold Coast in terms of driving what has been a really significant period of strong population growth that is likely set to continue over the next 6.5 years or so as we approach that 2032 Olympic Games timeline. We know that there's a number of factors that have really attracted people to the region, so certainly value has been one of them, so that comparative affordability advantage we see between homes in, say, Sydney and Melbourne, although not so much the case anymore with Melbourne, with Brisbane values having overtaken Melbourne now and many southeast Queensland regions as well. But despite the erosion of that comparative affordability advantage, we still see, of course, an advantage when it comes to Sydney home prices, but there's lifestyle, there's jobs. With that deeper population base comes a greater employment market and growth of jobs and all those things that are attracting people, shorter commute times, connectivity and the like.
Yeah, I mean, shorter commute times. Peter, we spoke earlier in the week. You had to go up to the Sunshine Coast. You told me you spent 5 hours in the car. I mean, that's got to be sorted before 2032.
I also didn't tell you I actually was on the Brisbane Metro earlier in the week. I went to have a look around. It's pretty hard to justify putting in a petty cash claim for 50 cents as a work expense. But no, I was 5 hours in the car, and I think the work the Premier and Deputy Premier are doing about public transport is absolutely critical. I don't think there's anyone in the room that doesn't get affected by the growing pains of southeast Queensland. I think mode shift, it's a boring topic, but it's about getting us out of cars, and it's probably the next generation is where we're going to have more success. My children are catching the light rail down to the beaches every second weekend, and it's fantastic, it's safe and reliable. So public transport, connecting the regions, connecting the precincts, I think we're all on this together, and that's absolutely critical from a lifestyle perspective, getting people out of cars, giving them a safer option, a quicker option, and we've certainly got the economical option already on the table. I think that's how you get people out of their cars, and hopefully I'll be one of them.
James, I feel like you really want to jump in here. I was going to go to you anyway, so what are your...
I feel like I've said too much already.
No, not at all. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, the key is better connectivity, better public transport.
Yeah, 100%. No right-minded person would argue against a more highly connected region. I mean, the advantages are clear. The issue has always been about funding and timing, and that's okay because they're expensive things. And I guess the more conscious conversation is, rather than arguing about whether or not it's a good idea, because I think we all would be in furious agreement, it's actually what are we prepared to give up to get there. So you could entertain private capital in a public infrastructure sense, which is pretty radical, but there are those sorts of things. And then from a community perspective, the truth of the conversation too is there's a density trade-off. In order to fund and justify and build business cases for these things, we need more density. And those issues aren't necessarily always linked together, but I think if we can come to terms as a collective region about the trade-offs, I think we could probably get there a bit faster.
Eleanor, I want to talk about density that James has brought up. What do you think this region looks like? You mentioned that the 2,000 a week that are coming could potentially increase. What do you foresee in terms of density in this region?
Look, I think it's a really important question, because when we think about a mega city or a mega region and enhanced connectivity between all the regions that make up this proposed mega city, we've got to think of housing as a really important part of that, particularly with, as we've spoken about before, that 2,000 people a week that are landing in the southeast Queensland region. And we know that housing affordability has deteriorated significantly over this past 6.5-year period. So the median value of a home in Sydney was around 2 times more expensive than the median value of a home in Brisbane. If we cast our minds back to 2019, that is certainly not the case now. In fact, it's a little below 1.5 times. And that gap is closing fast, and it's very similar for a number of these southeast Queensland regions. So we've really got to think about being able to right-size the supply of housing and the delivery of housing in those regions where that depth of demand is deepest, and it's different across the regions. But I think if there is a collective collaboration, we can really work to enhance connectivity and density in the right places and where we need that density. So we need to focus on an increase in supply, but also shifting that cost curve down. And that comes with things like unlocking land supply, decreasing red tape, decreasing the cost to build, targeted migration with respect to trades that we need more of. So we can look at the kind of build pipeline in terms of we need to enhance build capacity as well, and that means more people available to build.
Yeah, I mean, the previous panel talked about needing a lot more hotels. We're obviously going to need a lot more housing. Peter, I feel like you're best to talk about this. There's that need for a skill set and a chance that there currently aren't enough workers to probably fulfil it.
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to it. The skill set's something that's critical. We talked previously about I think the state government are spending money on new TAFEs for the first time in a long time, and it's about getting kids talking about going to TAFE again. When I was back at school, half my mates left in year 10 and went and studied a trade, and they're all semi-retired now. So there's a real future. There's a real future in being a tradesman. There's a real future in being skilled in not just having to go to university. And I think it's changing that dialogue, and I think Queensland's leading the way with investment in TAFEs. TAFE's been something that has been left behind in other regions. I think the second part is the density question, is putting density in the right locations. And we recently did a case study, went back to Sydney where I was originally from, and you look at what's the changes in height and density in the right locations done well, and it's back to that precinct argument. It's not just one-offs. Being able to invest in precincts around public transport, for my mind, is where we need to be putting density and height, and not being afraid of height. And secondly, as I mentioned, investing in the future, continuing to invest in that TAFE system and encouraging skilled workers, because we're certainly going to need them.
It's also a really ripe environment for innovation too, which is something we could be famous for in the future, particularly around housing. The challenge with things like modern methods of construction and other forms of innovation, even getting density off the ground, the whole shebang basically, has been the addressable market hasn't always been necessarily clear. But given that we know we have the games coming, and given we know we have constraints around delivery through government procurement and private sector procurement, everyone's on the hook. You could actually build the market certainty required to really invest very deeply in innovation in this space, and actually come out of it leading the world. It's just another point of fame